Good morning. I know everybody's feeling good, had an extra hour of sleep. I'll tell you what, sometimes unless you have an insider view of how things work, it's easy to judge them as being more simple than they really are. I've worked, obviously, with elders and making decisions for a lot of years now, especially at times like these when weather is inclement. And I'm like Danny, I've always been reticent to cancel. But there was a time in Chickasha, we lived in Chickasha and I was preaching there. Our house was 3 streets over from the building, so when snow or ice would come, I was one of the designated people to drive up to the building and take a look at the parking lot. It's similar, our building, as you know, is very similar to theirs. And also, similarity is their parking lot is on a slight grade, like ours is. Their grade is away from the building, ours is toward it. And one of the benefits of that, if you actually slip and fall, then you just slide right on into church. However, in Chickasha, if you slip and fall, you slide right into hell. And so it was one of those mornings, and it was really borderline. And so I drove up and drove around the parking lot, and there are things that I think sometimes we don't consider, and that is the parking lot is the most dangerous part of the trip. It's like Charlotte and I, we had plans to keep grandkids this weekend, and we're on the phone constantly to our son who lives down the Oklahoma City area, how much snow expected to come, et cetera, et cetera. And we knew the interstates would be clear because it doesn't take long for that. It's that last mile, and you can have a wreck in that last mile just as easily as you can anywhere else. So you have to consider everything. I'll never forget this one, and it was really borderline. And I drove, and I tested the streets and all of that in the parking lot, and I called them, and I said, guys, I think it's going to be okay. And so they went ahead and let everybody know we were going to have service. Sweet little lady parked in handicap parking, got out of her car, 2 steps, fell and broke both of her wrists. And so that's when I realized I'm not qualified to be an elder. But it really is a judgment call, and it's those things like 4th down, do you go for it or do you punt? You're always going to be second guessed on that. And I would encourage you to understand that in decisions like this, there are so many phone calls and text messages about what to do that's going on, thinking not just about you, but thinking about each member of this congregation and the challenges facing them, et cetera. If you see in heaven a woman with 2 casts on her wrists and I'm not there, you know why. Last week we were talking about establishing a destination and then plotting a course and then adjusting your heading. And it's if you think about that, the course it's kind of like a flight plan. I'm going to go from here to there. Or we talked about the example that we used was if you're sailing from New York to, say, Sierra Leone in Africa, you plot a course and then you set a heading, and your heading is not the same as your course. The course is where you're going to go. The heading is accounting for all the changes in current, in wind, in storms, and so you constantly have to replot your bearing. You have to change your bearings, and I was telling you that constantly, and now we've got computers that do that instantly in airliners, cruise ships, and all of that, because it constantly has to do that. But I want to remind you that begins with what's your destination. You can't enter a flight plan, you can't enter what your course is going to be, much less destination, unless you have determined where it is that you're going to go, what's your destination. And the challenge that we face today is there are very few people who have a sense of destination. There's very few people who have a sense of where I'm going. And in our culture, the concept of live for today, and that's a really good biblical concept, has taken the place of having a destination, and that's the only way you can plot a course, and that's the only way you can evaluate how our bearings are working. Are we going to end up with at our destination? And remember the 1 degree rule. If you're 1 degree off course, you're going to be a mile off your destination for every 60 miles that you travel. So if you don't set your bearings, you're not going to achieve your destination. And you can get out in your boat and you can put your sail up and just let the winds take you wherever they want to, and that represents the way so many people live. Now here's the issue. They will have a sense that something is wrong, but they won't realize we're off course. They won't realize we need to adjust our bearings because there's no sense of destination. I want us to go back to this passage, and we're going to spend a little time with this passage today that Terrell just read. And I want you to see the simplicity of it, but the importance of simple doesn't always mean easy. Simple means straightforward. Brethren, I do not regard myself as having laid hold of it yet. Part's very important. But one thing I do. Forgetting what lies behind and reaching toward what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal of the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Let us therefore, as many as are perfect, have this attitude. And if in anything you have a different attitude, God will reveal that to you also. However, let us keep living by the same standard to which we have attained. In other words, let's make sure there at the end, let's make sure that our bearing is keeping us to the standard. That's the destination. That's the course. Let's make sure that we are on course. Now, I haven't achieved my destination, he's saying. But this one thing I do. I wish folks would learn to live their lives with one goal in mind. We get so overwhelmed with so many different goals, but there is one over which every one of our goals should submit, and that's this goal right here, the upward call. Paul's going to talk about 3 directions. He's going to talk about behind, he's going to talk about pressing on forward, and he's going to talk about upward. Upward is the one that gets lost. Now think about it. Mariners, airline pilots, they get their bearings not from what's around them, but from what's above them. A section is a device where you can line up with the stars where you are and what your course is. And that throughout centuries, mariners have used a sextant to get their destination as well as their location from the stars. We do the same thing now, it's just not quite as far out. We use satellites. When you get in your car and you tell your GPS where you're going, the reason you have a GPS is because it will continue to tell you where you need to change direction. And if you think about it, just if you put your GPS on just to get home, how many changes of direction do you go through just to make it to your house? How many times does your bearing have to change in order to achieve your destination? How does your GPS tell you when you've done it wrong? We once had back before cell phones had GPS, we had one that you put on the dashboard, and you could download voices for it, and you can these days too, but I don't know how many of you remember Green Acres. If you remember the show Green Acres, there was a character on there named Mr. Haney, and I loved his voice. And so I downloaded Mr. Haney's voice on our GPS. And not only did he bring the voice, he brought the characteristic, and I loved it. Sometimes I'd get off course just to hear him. He's, no, now you've made a wrong turn. You're going to have to change. We need to pull over just as, and I love that. And you see, your GPS will constantly tell you, but that's coming from above. You see, all of this direction stuff that we do today, whether you fly an airplane or a ship or even a car, comes from above. It comes from satellites. Because it takes that kind of perspective. You can't just look around. If you get lost in the woods, you can't look around for your bearings. You've got to look up. And that's what Paul is trying to get us to understand, is if we're going to make this upward call, we've got to make sure that our one task leads us to bearings that constantly bring us back. Now, the first direction he talks about is behind. Forgetting what is behind. This one thing I do, forgetting what's behind. Paul had many major regrets. He was bringing Christians to be stoned. He had many arrested. Now think about it. How many parents did he pull away from kids in arresting them? Leaving the kids, he comes into the home, he grabs someone with all the authority of the Sanhedrin, and he's bringing them to be stoned. He's bringing them to be tried because they're followers of Christ Jesus. This is a blasphemy to him because Jesus is not God. And so anybody that follows him, especially a Jew, they're following a false God, and they need to be stoned. He's reviving this whole idea of stoning people for idolatry. It wasn't being done at that time. And so he's grabbing people with no sense of their situation because of the way that they're living. Guys, have you ever thought at night around the campfire, did Paul ever hear in his dreams the screams of those who had been tortured? Did he hear the crying children, "Daddy, Daddy, don't go," because he's taking them away? He had that in his conscience. But he's saying, I put that behind. He didn't forget it. We're going to talk about this. What he's saying, I don't dwell on it. He was the chief of sinners. That's his own words. Jesus confronted him face to face. He's never done that to you or me or anybody else. And said, Saul, why are you persecuting me? Why are you doing this to me? Can you imagine what that feels like to have when you finally realize who this guy that I've been living against and persecuting people against, when I finally realize what it is and what I have done? You think they were pierced to the heart at Pentecost. What do you think this guy felt? And he's saying that. He's got a lot to put behind. He was struck blind as a result of seeing Jesus. Forgetting does not mean not remembering. That's denial. Forgetting means not being controlled by, not focusing on, not dwelling on, not allowing the past to impact my now, except in how I learn from it. You ever wondered, why can't we reformat our memories? God can forget things. He can put them out of their memory. We can't. Why didn't he create us with the ability to do that? How many people walk around with guilt? How many people walk around persecuting themselves constantly for decisions they've made in the past, for people that they've hurt in the past? Why doesn't God allow us in our baptism, in our cleansing, why doesn't he take that away? Paul's saying, I purposely do something with those memories. And please understand, his memories are much more vividly evil than yours. The things that you want to forget are the things that you absolutely need to remember and even to embrace. Now, let me explain. They're fuel. Where do you think Paul's passion for saving folks came from? Where do you think his passion came from, being stoned and left for dead, getting up, in essence, and dusting himself off and saying, now what town's next on the list? Why would somebody do that? Because he's got this pay it forward idea. And that's what he means by forgetting the things that have gone before. I'm fueled by them. I don't dwell on them. I don't ever forget them. Because they're part of what's made me what I am. And it's so important we understand that. that we are molded as much by the mistakes we make, and even more so than the great choices we make sometimes. Because it gets us back to our bearings. And without remembering those, without understanding those, we don't have the fuel to change our bearings. They're mile markers of our progress. Look at your past. Look at mistakes that you've made. Look at sins that you've created. Look at people that you've hurt. Now look how far you've come. That's what mile markers are on the side of the highway for. It's to let you know where you're on your journey, because a lot of times it just looks the same. But remember, they're done. What's in the past is completed. It's forgiven. There's no reason for guilt, but use it for fuel. It's like any coach will tell his team, remember when they beat us last year in the playoffs? Remember that. Because when we go out there and face them now, we're going to make it right. You see, if they forget that, the fuel's gone. And you're a stronger conqueror because of that. You see, there's no conquering without overcoming sin and mistakes and fault. There's no conquering without overcoming personality slights that we have. And that's why Paul said, as many of you as are perfect. Now, you're like him. Not that I've attained it. I'm not perfect. No, you're made complete by Christ. You're perfect in the eyes of God. When God looks down and sees your sin, he doesn't see them at all, because the blood of Christ covers them. 1 John chapter 1. All he sees is clean. And these are ministers to others. What you've overcome, what you've learned, what you've suffered through. What you've suffered through because you caused it are ministers to others, if you'll use them that way. All things work together for good, not just good things. He didn't say all things are good. He said all things work together for a good outcome. Grab the fuel. Focus. Reestablish your bearings. And use it to help other people plot their course. I've got a theory I want to share with you. I think I can justify this quite a bit. Paul, I want to suggest to you that, considered for your approval, and this is the theory, but I think there's scripture to support it. Paul's major issue, his thorn in the flesh, if you will, was something to do with his eyes. Concerning this, I entreated the Lord 3 times that I might depart from me. And now there's several times he's talked about his vision. See with what large letters I'm writing to you with my own hand. Paul normally used a scribe. He would dictate, but there were times that he wrote personally, and he's reminding them how difficult it is for him to write because he's using large letters. For I bear you witness that if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. I don't think he's just talking about that. I think you struggle with me so much that you would have been willing to give me your eyes if you could. And I want to suggest to you that one of the things that may have happened is when he was struck blind, there were things like scales that fell from his eyes. I want to suggest to you the possibility Paul carried a scar the rest of his life. That he talks about it, and I don't want to spend a lot of time with this, but there was an issue with his ability. And he asked God, take it away, because if there's anything that could limit Paul in his missionary journeys, it's a challenge with eyesight. That's how he was called. Because he didn't like being dependent on other people. He didn't like being led around for 3 days. It's not the way he lived, but he had to learn submission. And I'm going to suggest to you that he wanted to get back to where he was, and there's a good possibility that God left him with a scar to remind him. To remind him. not to crush him. I think we look at the ideal relationship with God. Here's me, there's God, and I find him. With some of us, it's a little more circuitous route. With others of us, it's even more circuitous. We head in one direction before we head back. Now, the one in the middle, sure, that's ideal. It's not human because we're all prodigals. You're either one of those on the left or you're this one. But if we're the one on the right, we tend to focus on that part of it. How hard it was, how long it took me, why didn't I think right? Boy, if I could go back and do then, if I knew then what I knew now, and all of those kinds of things, and it's all for lost. If you've ever thought, I'd love to go back to high school knowing what I know now, let me set your mind at ease. You would have been a freak. Teachers would have loved you, but they would have been frightened of you, and students would have wanted nothing to do with you. It doesn't work. And guys, to focus on these different plots, these different courses, and these are folks who got off course, and they had to reset their bearings. And the one on the right, it's resetting bearing after resetting. It's mess after mess after mess, new bearing after new bearing. But the point is keeping your eye on the destination. It's only when you know the destination that you can change the course. And the point is, wouldn't it be better in the middle? Absolutely. But it doesn't work for us because we're humans. But if we keep our eyes on our destination, where are we going? We will make those course adjustments. Is it painful? Yes. Do we learn? Hopefully. But the point is arriving at the destination. Now, the problem with the one on the right is you don't know how much time you have. You don't know how long your life is going to be. But if you keep making the course adjustments, and if God grants you the gift of grace of time, the destination will be achieved. Brothers and sisters, if you keep on keeping on, you're going to make the destination. And that's what he wrote this passage to tell us. The second direction was reaching forward, keeping my eyes on the prize of the upward calling. I keep going dead ahead. Now, what I want you to understand, in our nation, this is a huge issue. It's a negative issue. Because remember, course versus bearing. You have to change your bearing. All ahead full is exciting, and that's the way Americans live. All ahead full. Batten down the hatches, here we go. Where are we going? I don't know. But we're going to make great time getting there. Discoverers, adventurers, folks that are fearless, that's all exciting, and it's also great fantasies. But without a destination, it's just burning myself. And how many folks end up later in life with so many regrets? Remember, years ago, the lead singer of the Rolling Stones was on Johnny Carson. In a moment of insight, here's a guy who had it all, and in a moment of insight, Johnny asked him, so you've got all the money, you've got all, what's it like? And he said, I always thought there would be more. Then he caught himself. And he changed and went on, but he gave a brief insight of what he was saying was, I've got regrets because I thought there was something more. He had no destination. Traveled the world, concerts everywhere, for decade after decade after decade, with no destination. Had he had a destination, he would have said, I can't wait for more. Never lose focus on the destination, which is the upward call. Reaching forward without the prize is just burning one's self for motion. The upward call comes down from up. You can't get it from around. Never ceases to amaze me. Folks in trouble get on Facebook and look around for a solution. Like these folks are better off than you are? Like they know more than you do? You need an upward call. So he talked about putting the past behind and pressing on, but he talked about pressing on to a destination. That's the upward call. I press on toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. This is a call, brothers and sisters. This is not a destination he can achieve. It's a calling to a destination. You keep your eyes on the prize. You press on. I will call you to be. The upward call is not his direction, it's God's. The prize is to be called upward to meet Jesus in the air. And we will rise to meet him in the air. He will call us to come to him. You've got to believe that more than you believe anything else in your life, or you're not going to adjust your bearings. You've got to believe that he's going to come in the clouds. You've got to believe, just as certainly as you believe that you're here right now, that he's coming back, he's going to call your name, and you're going to adjust your bearings to make sure you're where you need to be when he calls you upward. When we rise to meet him in the air, and he invites us to heaven. If our calling is upward, our lives cannot be downward. We can't live downward. We can't be depressed. There's something wrong if we're down. There's something wrong if we're defeated. There's something wrong if we're overwhelmed. There's something wrong if our focus is down. And that alone tells us we need a change of bearings to get back on course to achieve the destination. And the destination is the upward call. Up. It's not all ahead full. It's all up full. That's our destination. That's our course. That's our bearing adjustments. As we're still at the beginning of the year, I want to invite you, if you have any need to make a course adjustment, what are you waiting on? For eternity to come? For time to end? For Jesus to return? What are you waiting on? If you know you need to make a course adjustment, you're just getting further and further off course. And that's where the enemy wants you, because when he cuts you from the herd, he can have his way with you. Are you closer to your destination than you've ever been before? If not, please, I beg you, change your bearing. Get back on course. Head toward full speed to the upward call. Can we help you do that today? Come as we stand and sing, would you?